All right. Before I get started too far, I did want to address some comments I saw on feedback forums. I feel like a lot of you guys are feeling a bit overwhelmed with Django and kind of feel like, hey, I kind of understand all the concepts, but when I go to apply it, it's a whole nother story. I'm assuming probably a good bit of you probably have that feeling, and that is perfectly fine. Um, I would expect that to be the feeling you have right now. So don't think that means you're behind or you're lost. That's just part of the process. Um, I generally say you weren't really going to understand these things really well until you do them about 7 times. So your seventh Django app, by then you'll be like, okay, now I know what the heck I'm doing. Now I feel really confident and I can go like plow through this stuff. But for those first six, you're probably going to be doing a lot of referring back to other code, like the class demo or something else like that to try to see how we did it there, and then try to apply the concepts to your project. And I recommend looking at other projects. Like I have class project is good, but it doesn't just go over everything. So go find other projects to kind of look at, see how they do things. I think that'll be really helpful. And you can refer to those while you're working through your projects. But I'll say the first couple times I do a new framework, there is zero amount of me that's even attempting to try to write all that code by myself without referring to anything. Um, I'm generally my first attempt, I'm mocking an entire thing. I see somebody else do it, and then I just try to do the same thing they did. And I try to understand why everything worked together. And then I try to break it and change it, right? And say, okay, well, they did this. Well, what if I wanted to do X, Y, or Z? And then I try to figure out how to do X, Y, or Z. And then I can move on to another project. And by then I've learned a lot, right? And I keep stacking that on top of each other. And that's how you start getting good at these things. Um, and once you get good at one backend framework, it'll be a lot easier the next time if you go to a new framework. Maybe it won't take 7 tries. Maybe it only takes 4 or 5 tries to really get it down. Um, my first backend framework took me a while. And I say it definitely took me the 7 tries. When I started switching to new ones, sometimes it took me 7 tries. Like when I had learned Laravel, I didn't know PHP all that well when I learned Laravel, so that one was a bit of a beast for me, and it took me another 7 tries. But when I learned something like Django or Fast API, um, I learned Flask was the first one I really learned of modern backend frameworks, I should say. Um, and so when I got to learn those other ones, they went really fast. It was a lot faster of a learning process. That learning curve really died down. So just don't freak out if you're feeling like that's what you have to do, because I think that's a good thing to do. Um, Anybody have any questions on that? Concerns on that? All right. Well, hopefully that was useful information for you. At least make you feel better. All right. So let's go on into our demo for today. So one, you have noticed VS Code got a cool UI update, right? Looks all pretty now. So it's kind of nice. Um, you'll see when we open these things up, right? We get little floating tabs now, which are kind of neat. There we go. See, we kind of float. Anyway, I thought that was neat. Um, but let's go ahead and do what we're talking about today. Yeah, they rounded all the windows out. I love rounds, right? I always complain about square. So let's get into it. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be working with a third-party API. And the third-party API we're going to be working with is this one called Noun Project. The course documents, the curriculum is a little bit outdated. And this is why I like to tell you, I always like to do my lectures, my pre-lectures as close to lecture time as possible because they have updated the Noun Project to V2 of the API. So in the classroom stuff, you will see V1 and stuff is a little bit different. There are a lot of similarities to what we're going to do, but there's going to be some differences. And then there's a couple differences that I just changed for just because I think it's a better practice and going to make your life a lot easier in the future. And I'll try to bring these up as we get through it. But the Noun Project, essentially, it's just a place where you can go get a bunch of icons um, and use them in your website. All right, so if I search something like fire, I can get these fire icons, right? You can just search icons and you can use these icons. The icons are given to you with URLs that you can embed, and they expire within an hour or something like that. So it's not something you'd save to a database. It's something you're gonna have to make a call for every single time because they want you to pay for their service. Um, and so they only let you have these for like an hour and then they expire and you have to go re-get your icon links and all that kind of stuff, and make another API call, which costs you money, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to be using the free tier of this service, which does have a lot of limitations. There are a lot of other services very similar to this. And there's ways to get icons for free. So there's no real need to necessarily do this. I generally will always use a free icon library, or I'll use something like Font Awesome, which is I like that one. It's another icon library that does have pay tiers. For a long time, though, the way they set up their pay tiers was really stupid because they just use different URLs for your API endpoint. So if you just did a Google search, you go find the right URL to get it for free. So I used to always use Font Awesome for free, even though that really wasn't the goal that they were trying to do. But let's talk about it. I've already set up and logged into an account, and I've already created an app, and I did not realize when I did that I could not create a secondary app. So some stuff has already been done for us. So you come in here, you have to log in, create an account, do your email verification. Once you do that, you're going to come over here to this API section, and this won't say view dashboard yet. It will say get started. And when you click on get started, it's going to take you to kind of this page, but it's not going to give you this app dashboard yet. It's going to give you a option to create a app. And when you create the app, it's just going to have a few things on it. It's going to say here, give me a name for your app, give me your contact information, and give me an app description. And that's what we're saying on here. It's since you already filled out. And there's like company name and website you can put in and that are optional. And then you just hit OK or something like that, and then you're done. Once you've done that, it will give you your keys. And that's very standard practice. So generally speaking, once you set up an app, well, generally speaking, you either get an account and they just give you an API key straight off the bat, or you go generate one or generate your keys, or they make you create an app and then you have to set up the app. In this case, they wanted you to set up an app. And once they give you the keys, very often they only give it to you one time and they completely disappear and you can never get them back without regenerating the keys. So when you get the keys from one of these services, you generally want to write them down immediately, like copy them over somewhere safe. You don't want to get these keys on your GitHub because then people could use your credentials and your money you're paying, right? So keep these locally, keep them secure. This one does allow us to does keep my keys, so I can come right here and get my keys. If I did accidentally upload my keys to GitHub or share them somewhere I didn't want to share them, like after this recording, if I was on a paid account after this recording, I would come in here and hit regenerate API secrets to get new keys. But obviously I don't really care. We're on the free tier. Whatever. If you guys steal my keys, you steal my keys. Have fun with them. But you can see it will give you stuff like, usually they'll do stuff like this. We'll tell you kind of how much cost you're accumulating, what kind of usage you've had. You can see I was doing this yesterday, testing this out. I also made one on my personal account that I tested the day before. And that's why I'm really upset that I did this on the Dakota Platoon site because I can't show you the setup. But it was pretty simple. There wasn't a lot to it. Any questions about that so far? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy these just off to the side for myself, just for a minute. We'll come back to them. All right, so what I want to show you here is what is the first rule when you use a new API, guys?
Documentation.
By now. Read the documentation. That's right. If you don't read the documentation, you have no idea what you're doing, and it's pointless. All right, so we'll go over here, read our documentation. Well, actually, it's not under that. It's inside of here. And it tells us what to do here, right? Create a key, how to authenticate, our usage limits. Gives us the sample code right here. So this is pretty important. This is exactly what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be literally, the code we're going to write is me copying and pasting this, okay? Not much to it here. This API uses something called OAuth 1, which is an older version of OAuth. Right now we're on version 2.1. And they're using kind of an older way of doing it called OAuth 1. So we're going to have to get a couple things here. We're going to have to use this thing called requests. Have you guys seen requests yet in Python? No? So Python requests is like Axios. okay, but for Python. So it does your API calls for you, does calls for you, but it doesn't work asynchronously like the JavaScript one does, right? Because if in JavaScript, you have to be doing these calls asynchronously or the UI freezes. Because if it has to stop and think, the UI freezes and it doesn't do anything. On the back end, we can kind of pause what's going on in the back end for a minute and it'll be okay. So you're not as worried about that. So there is ways to do requests asynchronously, but we don't need to normally worry about it. So we are just going to use this one that runs it in order. So it's just request.get. You pass it at endpoint, and then you can also pass it like a auth carrier, like our OAuth. But generally, you just write request.get and you pass it to an endpoint. And then you can do the .content and you'll get your content. And it'll just work in order. No awaiting, none of that mess, no callback functions. Very straightforward, very easy to use. All right. So the main thing we're going to see here is the OAuth provider takes our API key and our API secret key, and then it uses that to build our credentials. And we use those credentials here in the response or in our request, sorry. And that's all we're going to do. We just got to pick the right thing. So this is going to icon/1. And we just got to figure out the right things to use. There are a lot of uses language. I would look at that stuff if I were doing this for the first time. But we kind of got our start here. So it's going to be pretty easy API to use. So they also provide us with something called an API Explorer. That's V1 Explorer. I don't want that one. I want V2 Explorer. If I can't find it, I have the URLs. I already have it open, so I'm just going to pull it from there. I don't know. That's the link for the other one, but I don't know where the one for this one is. So we'll just move over to it. It is this right here. It's api.nounproject.com/explorer if you're trying to find that. And what it's doing here is it gives us all the endpoints. And this is kind of a common thing to do is to see something like this where you see all the endpoints. And then a lot of times they let you test them. And usually testing them looks in different ways depending on the platform. In this case, they want us to insert our API key and our secret key here. And I wrote them down, but I forgot which one was which because I didn't label them. So let me go double check on my app dashboard. 78 is the key. I have key on top. So we can go ahead and copy and paste these in. Note, this is not the best thing to be screen sharing, right? Because it's showing my keys. But now we have our keys in here and we can now play with this API and kind of see what happens. All right. Just trying to remember which ones I wanted to look at first. All right, so we're going to look at this v2/icon/icon ID. So it gives us all the parameters we can fill in, and then we can try it out. So let's just look at for icon 1, and what we're going to get back is, oh, we got forbidden. Well, I put my key. I pasted the same key twice, didn't I? Ah, crud. All right, copy and paste, man. Never trust that copy. All right. There we go. So we've now put in one and it shows us the response. So this gives us the shape of the response, tells us what it looks like, and we can learn a lot from this before we ever start writing code, right? This is really useful to look at. We see here, we get back this icon key, and it has a big old dictionary in it, and it tells us like, hey, this is trash by the noun project. It has ID of 1, and it gives us the icon URL. All right. It also gives us a thumbnail URL. And if you read the documentation, it does say it's best to use this thumbnail URL. So that's what we're going to do. And we see that it's giving us this icon. Okay. So this is what we'll be able to use to insert on our site. And what we're going to want to do eventually is put a icon with each one of our Pokemon. And we're going to do that based on the type of the Pokemon. All right. So we'll figure out how to do that here later. But we get all this great information. And then really all we do care about out of all this, right? It does tell us the prices of using this. All we're going to care about is this thumbnail URL because that's all we really need. So there's another endpoint I want to show us. So we had that one, and then we had the one with a query. So let's see, get v2 slash icon, v2 slash icon. So this one right here allows us to stick in query parameters. And this query parameters, sorry, these are all query parameters, but a particular one called query, and that parameter is a search. So let's just say we had like a Pokemon type of fire. Maybe this is what we'll do. This is what we'll do. We'll use this endpoint. We'll set the search query for fire. We will try it out. This will get us back a dictionary with a icons key, and that icons key has a list of icons that match our search, right? And the way we're going to set this up is just going to be really simple. We're just going to take the very first thumbnail out of it, and that will be our icon we're going to use. So if you see, we'd get this thumbnail URL, and that's going to give us a little fire icon. Keep in mind, if we search normal, which we're going to be using normal, right? Because normal is one of our types. We don't get a very good icon, but we're going to use whatever it gives us anyway, just for simplicity. Um, so I think let's see. I can't remember what it gives us. It's something silly. It's like a thermometer or something, I think. Yeah, a little weird thermometer, I guess, normal temperature. So that's what we'll be using for normal. But that's just to keep it simple and not have to kind of find a better way to handle that. But that's kind of how this API works. Does anybody have a question how the API works? And every API works a little differently, right? So you always need to check this stuff out, figure it out, and learn how it works. All right. So before I get too far, I do want to go ahead and bring up the cheat sheet I made for today. It's not the cheat sheet to go over lecture. This is more to help you when you guys get to it. Yeah, here it is. When you guys get to having to do this in your projects or doing this for your homework or just doing this on your own, because all these APIs are different. I didn't want to give you some blind thing that says, hey, this is how you did the noun project, right? Like, here's some like more generalized information to help you out. Um, So our big picture here is, your front end, works with your Django API. Your Django API is what's going to contact the third-party API provider. It's going to get a provider response. Django's going to reformat it, extract what the important bits, whatever it needs, and it's going to send that off to the front end. So that's kind of our workflow. Um, Down here, the bottom right, the universal workflow. These are kind of the steps that you're going to need to take whenever you're trying to incorporate a third-party library into your projects. And I've laid them all out here for you. But note, the very first one is read the provider docs. If you ever come to me and ask for help on an API, and I start asking you if you read the documentation, you tell me no, I'm ending the call. Okay? I'm not going to bother helping you if you're not going to help yourself. But potentially you need to read the docs, you need to verify your credentials, possibly install auth library. You don't always have to install auth library. You're going to need to store your secrets in an env or in your env vars, however that is. If you have a .env file, which is how we're going to be storing our secrets, you need to make sure that's protected. You're going to need to load and validate a config, possibly create a service layer, validate the incoming data, build an authenticated request, set a timeout, check the status code, validate the response shape, return clean and trim data, handle errors and map responses, mock it and test and monitor and rotate credentials. And you don't necessarily have to do every single one of these steps. As you'll see, we'll be skipping some of these steps, but these are good steps to think about and walk through and decide whether you need them or not. Down here, I do have some common mistakes and some production ready checklists, which will be useful for you guys later on. And then all I'm talking about in the rest of this is kind of what to do here. So how to store your secrets, how to protect your env file, how to load those env secrets to your Django project, how to create that service layer, and kind of what that endpoint will look like, right? And we'll be doing all that today in class. And then we talk about some authentication methods again. So I just wanted to bring this up because we talked about bearer token and basic auth the other day, or we talked about tokens, but bearer token is a type of token. And we talked about basic auth. There's also API keys, so they'll just go in essentially in your headers. A lot of times it's X API key. Sometimes it tells you to do a different header for that, but a lot of times it's X API key, and you just paste it in. Bearer token's kind of the same way. You'll get a token and you say bearer space token, and that will be your header to get that request. And then here is some like basic auth. Once again, you'll do your request and you'll send in your username and password, right? Not many APIs use that. It's not a very good system for APIs. And then over here is OAuth 1, which is what we're using today. So this is a signed request using a key and a secret. And this is kind of how you usually set that up. You have some OAuth 1 provider, and you pass it in your key and your secret. OAuth 2, you will likely run into OAuth 2 when you're working on your projects. This is pretty common these days. It's a little bit more intensive, um, but it is a lot better overall. Um, so something like get an access token, use that token for API calls, um, and you'll just stick it in there as like a bearer token eventually when you're doing it at that point. But you go in here, you get a grant type, and you make your auth. A lot of times you have to add permissions or scopes to these things and say, hey, look, I want to be able to access the ability to read, edit, delete this resource, and you might have to go request those types. And usually that means somewhere on the back end, you'll have to go set permissions. Like on the web UI, you'll have to go in there and set like, hey, look, I need permissions for this, this, and this. I need these scopes. So my app can do these things because they like to restrict what your app can do to what it needs to do so you don't get unintended side effects, right? You never want to give your app more power than it needs. So a lot of times you have to deal with that scoping stuff. When you're doing authorization, so a lot of times with OAuth 2, what you're doing is like you're logging in with GitHub or logging in with Google. If you're doing something like that, you're going to need to do something like this over here where you do this authorization stuff, where you redirect the user to the actual provider. They exchange tokens, they store and refresh those tokens. Um, and it kind of works in that manner. Once again, I'm not trying to teach you OAuth 2, just trying to make sure you're aware of it and give you a little bit of code to reference, a little bit of ideas to reference when you see it, what to do. Um, and then down here, it just kind of tells you kind of what to do in terms of making your requests and handling requests. You should always set a timeout. We're not going to do that, but it is very good practice. Validate your input before calling the provider. You always want to do that. Use query parameters instead of string concatenation where possible. So this is where you can just pass the params as a URL. We're not going to do that either, but it is better practice. Check static code, catch exceptions, make sure you know when it fails. Um, Inspect the response and shape. So you want to print and explore the shape of the data that are coming back to you. And we were just looking at the shape of data by going through that API Explorer. You want to trim and return clean data. So we'll be doing that step for sure. This is one of the ones you definitely are always going to be doing. So I just want to trim clean data, get any secrets or any random stuff out there that I don't need before I send that request, that information off to somebody else. And understand your rate limits. All right. So there's a lot of stuff you might need to do that with that to make sure you don't overuse your stuff. And you can implement caching or other kind of things to do that, but we won't be getting into that in this course. But just future reference. All right, so that's what that's all about. Don't get too beat up about it. All right. Any questions so far, guys, before we start writing code and get to the project? What's up?
Can you briefly explain caching?
Yeah, so the idea of caching is just saving information so you don't have to look it up later. So if you make one, like if somebody made an API request to say our Pokemon endpoint and they looked up Pikachu, and then we have to go look in the database, figure out the Pikachu, do all the stuff, right? That maybe there's a lot of work that has to be done to do that, right? And then we have to return out the Pikachu. Well, what we can do is we could cache that endpoint. And so we could set a timeout for that. So we could say like after 15 minutes or an hour, we need to refresh and make sure that we got fresh information. Or we could do invalidation strategies that say like, oh, when that Pokemon got edited, I need to go invalidate all my caches, right? Like maybe there was a put request to that Pokemon. Now that needs to say, hey, go invalidate the cache and make sure any new requests get a fresh copy. And that's really all there is to it. It's just a way to save yourself work looking up data and speed up your application a little bit.
So
Usually
that's
that
why it's
uses something
so
called Redis. Huh?
so that's why it's so difficult because you have to go back and make all of those programmatically. You have to
Hmm. Yeah, you
manually
definitely have to
say,
do a lot of manual invalidation to do a good job with it. Yeah. A
right.
lot of times it's really easy to implement like a basic version because I don't quite remember how it works in Django, but like in Flask, all I have to do is put like an at blah 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 dot blah 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 on the top of my thing, and it's going to cache it for me, and that's all I have to do, and it's done. I mean, once I have the setup done, which the setup isn't too bad at that point, but then doing the invalidation strategies is a lot more of a difficult chore, and getting that to work correctly. Good question.
Thanks.
So I'm just labeling my stuff so I don't forget, so I don't remember which one's which. All right. So let's go ahead and get into our code. And first thing we'll talk about is storing these pieces of information, right? We need to store um, these secret keys inside of a file or just in somewhere, right? We need to have them usable to us. In production, we store them in the actual environment. All right. Is everybody aware of environmental variables? If I come in here and I say something like hat is equal to 123, um, and then I say echo hat. I think I'm doing this right. I get back 123. Right? It's a variable that lives inside of my environment. Okay. And that's how we hide information. Okay. When we have information we don't want to share with people, we can't put it in our code because our code is going to go up to GitHub. It's going to be shared all over the place. We don't want to keep secrets there. So we keep them in an env file when we're doing it local, and we put it inside of our environment when we're in production. Sometimes you will see envs in production. You're really not supposed to use envs in production. But a lot of times you might see it happen, especially on smaller applications or demos. And I definitely have applications running right now that have envs just written straight up in there. Not good practice, but not always necessary to not do it. It's not the end of the world. So we're going to make a file called .env, and this is where we'll store our keys. So in the documentation, it says to use API key and to use secret key for our cancel secret SECRET for our keys for our env, but we don't really want to use those. One, because they're super generic and they can have collisions, right? What if I just put another API in here and it needs API key? So we're not going to use those terms. Also, Django also has something called a secret key. If we head on over to our, not DB, where is it? Oh, Pokédex project, and we go into our Pokédex project, and we go into our settings, and we come down here, boom, there's already a secret key, right? This is actually giving us a lot of, these are all environmental variables, essentially. So we don't want that to be the case. We don't want to override this secret key. So what I like to do, and I think it's good practice, especially when using these third-party APIs, is to go ahead and just prepend these with something that makes sense. So we're using NP for noun project. And then I'm just going to copy in my keys. And we'll put them right here. Now, one thing to be very aware of is we cannot commit this to GitHub. Right? If I push this to GitHub, there are bots that are going to be that are out there scraping GitHub constantly looking for keys to exploit. A couple things will happen if you upload a key. A lot of times these services that give you these keys will catch on to it quickly and they'll revoke your key. And they might even revoke your account if you do it multiple times. Say, look, this guy's giving the keys away too often. We are going to shut down his account and you have to make a brand new account. So you want to be really careful about not committing these to GitHub. So that means we need to put it in our git ignore. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add it to my git ignore. And I'm going to also add a few more things just because we've never added them. I'm going to add PyCache. I should have added this a long time ago for everybody in this class's sake, but I was kind of waiting for a good time to talk about it. So that's getting rid of all these little PyCache folders like this, right? We don't need to upload those. That's just trash, right? That's just our Python code being translated into bytecode that will then be read and used by the computer. So it's just intermediary result. Other things that we want to get rid of are like the PyCache files, so like PYC or PYO or PYD. They're all different files that you might find in there. So we're just going to say like PYCOD to do the whole group of PYC, PYO, and PYD. If you're working with uh, Django or a lot of different things in the back end, you often have an SQLite DB, which is what you're using in testing. You don't want to push that DB up. We're not using that, right? We have ours linked up over here and we're using something else. We're using this Postgres, but we do have this one right here, right? We never really wanted to send that over anywhere. We don't even need it though. We can delete it, to be honest with you. We never needed that. We never used it. And then if you're on Mac, even if you're not a Mac and you're working with Mac users, you always want to add the .ds store because that's a hidden folder that gets into a lot of y'all's projects. And, it's never good to be in there. Kind of pointless. So we got our EMV or
What
get ignore
is
updated and our EMV here.
while you're on that
Question?
line? While you're on that line, that's why, sorry, I just had to dive in. While you're on that .ds store, what is that exactly? Because I always get that on my Mac. So like when I upload my, say, screenshots or whatever to Dropbox,
I
it'll
am,
one file didn't load, and it's this.
yeah, I'm 99% sure that is just where it keeps the thumbnails that it displays to you when you're in your little file explorer thing.
Okay, so it's
I
something
think
that
that's what
Mac
that's
just
for.
does, and
Yeah, it's just part of the way the Mac displays its file system and way it uses how way it puts works in that little Finder app that you guys use.
yeah. Okay, so it's
Yeah.
almost like it's little. Haha, I'm storing this for my memory and not for yours. And
Yep.
okay,
100%. Yep. It is so Mac can make itself work better. It has nothing to do with you and your project.
okay. So just make sure every project I do put that .ds store in there.
100%. Yeah. 100%. You
Okay.
don't want to be uploading that. That's just people are going to look at you like sideways. Like, why are you doing that?
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Mhm. All right. Cool. So if you do, oh, go ahead, James.
During our agentic project, we separated client and server side. Uh, I see that you're putting the git ignore above those two folders, like in the parent project folder. Should we also put it in the client and server folders if we end up having to break it up for GitHub as well? Or is best practice
Well,
for us to just
so
do this?
you can actually have multiple get ignores. You can put them in any folder you want, and it's going to work in that folder and all the subdirectories of that folder.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
So you can just keep the one and you have because I think your React project should come with one. You should have one for here. They can just kind of be independent and work together. I put it here in the root of my project because this is what I've been, doing my Git ads from. Um,
Okay, that makes sense.
what's up, Mohammed?
Does the .env lives outside the, like, shouldn't it be
No,
inside the?
no, it should be inside the project. Thank you very much. Typically, I'm working within this Pokédex project. I don't have this extra crap going on, so that was my bad. Yes, this .env should be inside of our Pokédex project. The get ignore, can live in here fine, just fine. If I'm doing dev, I would have everything inside Pokédex project. None of these other folders, all this other stuff would also be inside a Pokédex project. That's how I tend to do it. So I'd have my vinv inside of here. I'd have my readmes inside of here and my get ignore inside of here. My env would be inside of here, and I would be only opening that folder. What we'll see when we get to Docker Compose tomorrow is that I don't need this, right? I could use Docker Compose, and it'll make this all a lot easier, and I would have had that all inside of this Pokédex project folder to begin with. Yeah, so Dom's just begging for it.
And
Uh,
and does get ignore need to be updated to read in that folder, or does it
nope,
ignore every .env?
it will ignore every .env all the way down. Yep, and we can test it real quick if we want. So we can come in here and just do a get add dot, and we can do a get status. And we should not see that we have done anything involving that env file. All right, so it's saying we modify get ignore and we have deleted that SQLite file. So that's all we've done. If you do accidentally do a git add without having the env in your get ignore, you need to do something like git dash dash rm. Hold on, let me look at this note so I don't type it wrong. I don't do this too often.
RF.
Is it grip?
Oh yeah. It's just RM. Yeah. So it's get RM dash dash cached. That's where the dash dash came in. All right. And then it would be dot get ignore. And this will remove it from your history, your Git. Well, it's remove it from your Git history here locally, but it doesn't do any good for your remote. So if you push it to GitHub, you are still in a really bad spot because it's still in your Git history. This will remove it from this removes it from staging, but it's still going to be in your Git history. So you still are going to, if you have uploaded it at any point in time, it's going to still be up there in your previous commits. So it can still be found. So at that point, you need to invalidate your keys and then do this again. Do this and invalidate your keys, make new keys and start over again. There are ways to remove it from the remote. They're more complicated. I don't want to get into that. And it's really not going to do you that much good at that point because they're already been exposed. What's up, Keith?
So for this removal, because this is just the nightmare scenario, I really try and make sure I don't add anything that I don't want to commit. But
.env.
can you did it for a specific file there? Can you do it for get rm cached dot and then it'll remove everything that you put in there, or you have to do it individually?
Yeah, I think that would remove everything. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we can try. I don't want to try. I don't want to mess up anything. But yeah, that should work just fine. Generally it's just one or two files though that you're doing this with, so or maybe a folder. Sometimes you commit like your binv by accident. But once again, always try to set up your get ignore first thing when you start a project and just go ahead and start with a boilerplate, something like that, right? I have some boilerplates that I use for my get ignores and they're pretty long. Honestly, they got a little bit longer than this. But then I don't have to worry about it. I'm like, look, I got extra stuff in there, but now when my project grows, I'm already in a good place. So I would work on developing your own, with the tools and stuff that you use and try to just kind of get one that will be pretty easy to just copy pasta. All right. Awesome. So now we've covered that. Now we feel comfortable. We can go ahead and start writing our code. All right. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to head on over and create a new app. All right, we can do this from inside our container or outside our container. Doesn't really matter. I'll do it from inside my container. We'll do Python manage.py start app. Or start app won't work. And we will call it API app. All right, and this is where we'll do all of our stuff here. This will build that little integration layer for our API. All right, we got our trainer app. I just did my trainer app, so I need to do what, guys? First thing I should be doing?
Register.
Yes, registered in my installed apps. So we'll head on over here to settings, installed apps, register in my API app. And we are doing good. All right. And just because I want this to be a little more clean, I'm just going to organize it a little bit more. All right. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and wire it in to our URLs. So we're going to come over here to our site-wide URLs, and we will give this a path of API v1, and this time we'll use noun. Include, and we will include our API app.urls. I feel like everybody should be good on this step by now, right? All right. So now we'll head on over. Well, that means we got to go into our trainer app and make a urls.py. Oh, wait, it's already made. Sorry, we don't need to make that. It comes with us, I think. No, it doesn't. I was just in the wrong folder. All right. Yeah, I need to make it. I'm not crazy. urls.py. And we will go ahead and make the URL patterns. And we're going to need to import a couple things. So first we need to get from Django .urls. We're going to import path, just like we've done previously. And then from .views, I'm going to import something we haven't made yet called noun project. All right, so our path for our endpoint, we're just going to leave it blank for now. So there's going to be no path here. And we will do noun project .as view. And we will give it a name of noun project. Once again, remember the reason why we put a name on it is so we can use a reverse on noun project and it will give us the URL and we don't have to worry about what, if the URL changes, what to do. All right. So in order to use OAuth and requests, we do need to install them. All right, so I'm going to head over here to where I do my pip installs, which are just inside of my Pokédex project here folder, which I only put it there. So when I freeze, my requirements will be here. It doesn't really matter where I install it to, really. Just makes my freeze step a little bit easier. I don't have to type an absolute path or a relative path. I can just type requirements.txt. So we got our venv activated, and I'll do pip install requests, and that's going to give us the request package. But then we also need to do the OAuth. We're going to need requests _ OAuth lib. So requests _ OAuth lib. All right, and that are the two things we're going to be installing. Did anybody need to see that a little bigger? I feel like I see some people looking at the screen here. Pip install requests, request OAuth lib. That's what we just did. All right, now that I did a pip install, guys, what should I do? What do you always do after you do a pip install? That's right, Jason. Pip freeze. I saw you. Even though you're chilling back there with your coffee, all relaxed and cool looking. All right, so we're pip freeze to requirements.txt. And that will go ahead and update our requirements file. We can verify that it worked by looking in there and saying request OAuth lib. And if I just did that, that means I need to turn off and turn back on my Docker container because the way we have our Docker container set up, it doesn't have the installs. So let's go ahead and rerun it so it gets those installs and it will reinstall everything. And tomorrow we'll talk about a slightly better way to set up our Docker than we set it up, our Docker file, just to make this install step go a little faster. So right now, every time we start our container, we have to install everything all over again. So I'll show you half of a shortcut tomorrow. All right, we're getting an error because we can't import noun project, and that's fine because we haven't created it yet. All right, so let's go and write the view. So we're going to head on over to our views page, and we're going to write our view. So it'll be a class, and we call it noun project, just like we defined it earlier. And well, it needs to import, right? It needs to come from API view. It is a view, so let's go ahead and import this. So from REST framework .views, import API views. We're gonna need another one. We're gonna need that response, right? We've used this a bunch of times. So REST framework .response, import response. And I'll go ahead and do this import for the OAuth1 library. So we'll say from requests OAuth lib, we're going to import OAuth, capital O, capital Auth 1. It does let me import other ones. So there's OAuth 2s inside of here as well. We were using OAuth 1 today. All right. So what are we going to do here? First things first is we're going to go ahead and just explicitly set our authentication classes to nothing, which this is once again just kind of being explicit rather than implicit. A lot of times they say that's a better thing to do. I know I told you yesterday not to, or that it's kind of a waste, but it's, up to you. Explicitly setting no authentication class and no permission classes. So this removes that token off from here. So we don't have that token authentication even part of our project anymore, even though it is globally installed. And this brings me to a big caveat to the way we're handling this. So we are not going to have any protection on this endpoint. None at all. This endpoint is going to call this API, use some of our credits, and give back an icon. You guys see the problem? What's the problem, Mohammed?
You need authentication
Well, why? Why is authentication going to help me? Or what's the problem? What's the actual problem?
because anybody can use it, and somebody with no authorization can use your
Yes.
endpoint.
Yeah, so anybody can use my endpoint, use my credits, right? Now, you said add authentication. Well, is that going to help me all the way? That will stop some users from exploiting it. But if I just say is authenticated, all they need to do is create an account and then they can exploit it all they want to, right? So the real answer to this, we're not going to implement. I just wanted to make sure you guys are aware, is to do something like rate limiting, and limit the amount of time somebody can use these requests, and to use caching to help you out. So it's kind of a combination effort. And then also to use it authenticated will also help you out again too, right? So it's not the easiest thing to solve, right? So you're going to just try to install rate limiting, which says, hey, look, this person can only make X amount of requests per amount of time, right? Which will help you out. And you're going to have to figure out what that amount of time is to make sense with your application. Just
Does,
wanted to put that out there as a big caveat. What's your question?
doesn't all APIs have a rate limiting to a certain degree, like 10 per minute or something like that?
Yeah, they should, right? We're not implementing rate limiting, so ours doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, so ours doesn't. Our API that we're building doesn't have any rate limiting. So we would want to install some rate limiting to prevent people from abusing it. It's always a good idea, no matter what you're doing, to install some rate limiting because who knows what's going to happen and what people are going to do. And it could very easily give you like a DDoS attack where they just smack your endpoints till your application crashes. Um, and I've crashed my own applications with stuff like that. I've definitely done that, so it's good to do. But we'll move on now that I've explained that. So now we'll make our GET request here. And it will take self and the request. All right, because all we're going to be doing is giving information back from our endpoint here. And this is going to change as time changes. So this is not going to be the final version that we're writing right now, but it will be a working version. So the next step we're doing here is directly out of the documentation from the noun project. We showed you this earlier. So I'll say auth is equal to OAuth 1. And then it said to put the API key here and to put the secret key here. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and hard code those in for now. We'll learn how to do this in a smarter way here in a moment. I think that's maybe part 2 of the lecture. And we will go ahead and put these in. So now we have our API key and we have our secret in. And we'll come here and write our endpoint. And that's going to be, this is from the documentation. I'm writing it out by hand here real quick. The noun project.com/v2/icon/1. So this is the first one we looked at where we put it in an ID and it just gave us back the first icon. So this is going to give us that trash icon. All right, and we'll work into this as class goes on. We'll go ahead and get our response by making a request. So to use the request package, use request.get, right? Because we're going to make a get request. And we're going to the endpoint that we've written above, and we were sending through the auth provider as the auth that we created from OAuth1. All right, I did this wrong. Requests with an S, and I must have not imported it either. So import requests with an S. All right. Then what we'll do here, we'll print out to the terminal a little bit, the response.content. We can look at it. And then we'll get our JSON. So let's go ahead and try to hit this endpoint real quick. Where is us here? Slash. I forgot what we called it. Oh, wrong URLs. Noun, slash noun. All right. So let's go to slash noun. Oh, we didn't return anything from the view. So it's giving me an error, but hopefully it still printed the content. Okay, it didn't. I don't know if it did or not. I can't find it, but we'll just return a response real quick. Pass it true. We'll come in here, hit a real refresh. All right, so now we get that response of true. But what I wanted to show you is what was printing out here in the terminal. And what we see here is we do get this response. And note it is a B before a string. So this is, once again, a binary string. We've talked about these before. Last time we had a binary string, we used JSON loads to get that information back into a Python form. Well, requests, when you use the request package, it actually will do that for you if you use the .json method. So we can do response JSON is equal to response.json, which is a built-in method that will convert that to a JSON for you. So now when I reprint response.json, I will indeed, oops, instead of, I'm going to turn this off and we'll run this again. We will indeed now actually have the Python object. Come on, baby. Try that again. All right, for some reason we're not seeing it, but trust me, it is now officially a JSON. All right, it will look like a JSON. So essentially a Python dictionary, right? So now we can use it just like it's a Python dictionary. That's all my point is. All right. We're almost to breaking point here, guys. But what we want to do now is instead of hard coding in these API keys, because this is absolutely horrid practice, you would never do this in real life. You would lose your job. You don't want to do that. You want to actually store these or pull these out of the environment, right? So this env file is mocking all these keys being in our environment. Okay. So we've already put it in there. So now we need to use them. To use them, we need it to run. We need to load this env file when the application first loads. And we only need to load it one time. So to do that, we're going to use our settings file because this runs one time when the program launches. Okay. And it has some useful stuff already done for us. Like we need this right here to get our base directory of our project so we can correctly load our env. This is a big deferment from the way they did it in the course documents. And this is a much better way to do it because the way they did in the course documents, when you put your application to production, you're going to have to change the code. It does not work. It is not production ready code. So we're doing it a little bit differently here to make this production ready so we don't really have to make a big change when we move to prod. So this is where we're going to use something called Python .env. So that's another thing I need to install. And we'll do Python, or not Python, pip install Python -.env. All right, you guys definitely want to know that one. I don't think it's written down anywhere for you. Pip install Python dotenv. And I did this, so now I got to restart my Docker container. So my Docker container knows about that dotenv, but while it's working, we can write our code. So the piece that we want is something called load.env. So from .env import load.env. No, guys, I've been saying it DOT just so you don't write a dot there, but this is essentially .env, which is mimicking our .env file, right? That's kind of where that name come from. So now we have this thing called load.env, and we can use that to load our env. We can just load an env file just by a more simple way than we're doing, but we want to do it a smart way. So we're going to reuse this base directory to make sure we know where we're at. And that means that the env file needs to be in this base directory. And we're going to say, look, inside this base directory is our env file. We're going to tell load.env to load it from that location. To do that, we just say load dotenv. Note I have to do it after I declare that directory, though, or so I won't have access to it. And we'll pass in the base directory /space .env. Kevin, what the heck is the slash doing? You just have a random slash in your code. I've never seen that before. Is that some way to concatenate strings? No. Well, yes and no. So this is a only works special with these paths. So this is a special thing that these paths do when you use this path thing. It allows you to concatenate it with a slash. So you can build your file path. So this is the base directory. We're now adding a slash to the directory and then saying .env, right? So that's just completing our file path. So it'd be something like Pokédex, or I'm sorry, Pokédex project, right? Is what the base directory would be. There'd be like more stuff up here, right? There'd be like all the stuff to get to Pokédex directory. And then all we're doing is we're taking that, we're adding a slash, and we're adding .env. All right, so that's how that works. All right, so now we're loading this information when we boot our application, it loads this env file. And now we can go ahead and try to use those variables instead. So we're gonna head back over to our view. Instead of hard coding these in, we'll delete these. And we will go ahead and use the stuff from our env. To do that, we're going to use a package called OS, which is built into Python. And we'll come down here, or sorry, down here. How did I do this? Do this in 2 steps or 1? Yeah, I just put them all in there. All right, so this first one was the API key. So we'll do os.environ.get. Now note, I use .get here. It might not be the best practice to use .get. It really depends on your situation. .get will not throw an error when I pull out something from the environment that doesn't exist. So if I put an API key here, right now we won't get any feedback. So if I forget to load my env file, it will silently pass and then this just won't work. And we might not know why. So that would mean using bracket notation might be better here. But sometimes these environmental variables are optional. Or you might not have them at runtime for some reason. So then the .get's going to be better because it'll allow you to move along past that and not crash your application. So it's really dependent on what you want to do. I would say probably using the bracket notation here would be smarter, but I'm going to keep with the .get notation. All right, we pass in our secret key here. So now that is going to go into the environment, pull out this key out of the environment, and it's going to put the value of it right here on this line. So that means our endpoint should still work just fine, which it does, which it seems like it is. Well, actually, no, it's not even running. So let's run it again. And hopefully we'll see some output print out from that JSON. I don't know why it's not printing. Or maybe we're just not seeing it. I don't know. No module name. .env in import from a load. Did I not install it? Oh, I installed it, but you know what I forgot to do, guys? Why is it telling me this? What did I forget to do after I installed it?
You forgot to freeze it.
I forgot to freeze it. 100%. That's why I say every time you do a pip install, do your freeze so you don't forget. So we'll go ahead and get our Django container running one more time. .env will now get installed this time.
Kevin, would it be a better practice to pip install everything at the beginning with the
Oh, yeah,
steps?
100%. If you know you need it, just go ahead and pip install it at one time. Yeah. I'm just trying to
That,
do it as close to the time I'm using it just to make it easier to relate the pip install with the work that it's doing.
yeah, I was going to ask about best practices as far as knowing when to restall or restart the Docker container. Because it seems
Yeah,
like you've done it a lot, and I know you're teaching, so it's a little bit different, but
yeah. So restarting it, the way we have it set up, it depends on how you set it up, right? The way we have ours set up, anytime I make a change to my requirements, it's not reflected into my Django container. So every time I make a new requirement, I need to start my Django container, let it reinstall the requirements to get that new requirement in. So that's why I keep restarting it.
okay,
And
so
then,
basically when you change the requirements,
mhm.
that's when you need
Yeah,
it.
in our setup, that's the only time we need to restart it. It's also been crashing a lot. If you sit here with error in there too long, it will just crash out. Um, so you have been seeing that. I don't have that problem as much when I'm working alone, but when you're talking and teaching, you
Yeah.
go a lot slower. So it'll crash out a
So
lot
when
more
it
often.
says that status at the bottom, watching stat reloader or something like
Hmm.
that, that means it's
That means
good
you're
to
ready
go.
to go. Yep.
Nice.
Yep. And it does appear everything seems to be working okay. As I said, I don't know why I'm not seeing that response.json print out, but maybe I'll try to print that one out. There you go. All right. So, oh, well, that is the JSON printing out. So it finally printed out for us. All right. So you see it is connected. We are getting all of our information. And it did work. So our keys are still working after we moved them to environment. That's all I have for part one. We will continue working on this. We will format our response a little cleaner, and we will hook it up to our Pokemon in part two of this lecture. But so far, we've explored our API. We've talked about environmental variables, how to safely store them, and how to reload the environmental variables into our application. All right, so those are our big takeaways from today's lesson. Anybody have any questions before we break?